Jesse Owens, Young Record Breaker by M. Eboch, Chapters 9, 10, and 11. Chapter 9, College at Last. It looked like Jesse would reach his dream of going to college. The question was, which college? Everyone seemed to have an opinion. One Sunday evening, the family sat on the porch after dinner. Many of Jesse's older brothers and sisters had married, but they still lived in the Owens household. Housing was expensive, so the boys brought their wives home. Prentice shook the pages of a newspaper. "Did you read this?" he asked Jesse. Jesse shook his head. "They're talking about what college you should go to," Prentice said. "They don't want you to go to Ohio State." He read aloud from the Chicago Defender, a black newspaper. "He will be an asset to any school, so why help advertise an institution that majors in prejudice? You must realize that in the age in which you're living, a militant spirit against prejudice in all its forms must be shown." "Aw, come on," Jesse said. "I don't want to be a politician. I just want to win races." "Can't you do that at a black school?" Sylvester asked. "There isn't one with a good track program," Jesse said. "Coach Riley says most don't have enough money to pay for good coaches and tracks, and for travel to track meets. Most of them like football better anyway. But even with football games, white people don't watch. The teams only play against other black schools." "You're right," Prentice said. "You have to go to a good school. You need to compete against the best runners in the country, black or white. But they say the whole city of Columbus is as bad as the South. I've heard awful things about Ohio State. Black students can't share campus housing with white students. They made a black football player sit out of the game just because the other team didn't want to play against blacks. And you know there are only 100 black students there out of about 14,000. Jesse shrugged. "I'm used to that. It's mostly white students at East Tech. Lots of them are my friends. Why should college be any different?" "What does Riley say?" Prentice asked. "He'd like me to go to the University of Michigan, but I'd rather stay in Ohio, close to all of you." "Close to Ruth," Sylvester snickered. Jesse grinned. "Her too, and little Gloria. Anyway, Dave is heading to Ohio State and is going to join the track team. We'll be all right. Ohio State is going to get me a job, and I'll be able to go this fall if I pass some tests. Otherwise, I'd have to stay in high school for another semester." Prentice sighed. "Well, I hope you'll be happy there." Jesse spent the summer pumping gas and then headed to college. He wasn't allowed to live in the dorms, so he shared a house with other black students. None of the restaurants near the university would serve blacks. Only one movie theater let them in. It was the worst theater in town, and they had to sit in the last 6 rows. Jesse waited tables and worked in the library. He also got a job as an elevator operator in the state office building. Many of the college athletes worked with there because it was an easy job that paid well, but only white athletes could work in the front passenger elevator. Jesse worked the freight elevator in the back of the building. Jesse saw the silver lining. He only had to move the elevator once an hour to take the cleaning crew between floors. He spent the rest of his evening shift studying. Even so, with his poor education, college was hard for him. Classes were large, so he didn't get much help from the teachers, and he had a busy schedule with school, work, and training. The track coach also asked Jesse to give talks at local schools. With the help of a phonics class, Jesse overcame his problem with stuttering. He quickly learned to speak well with good grammar. It was still hard at first for Jesse to stand up in front of people and talk about himself. He remembered the wonderful preacher from his youth and tried to speak with the same dignity and passion. He told stories about his life, making them better at each telling. One of his favorite stories was about the time his mother cut the bump off of his chest. The students stared at him, wide-eyed, while he described the pain and the bleeding. "That cutting turned out to be a good thing for me," he told them. "That bump might have crippled me, for one thing, but also, from that day on, no physical hurt or discomfort made much of an impression on me. In track practice, when my lungs burned and my legs seemed like lead weights, I can still run one more lap or push a little harder." He gazed out at the classroom, meeting the eyes of one student after another. "That's something you should remember. You don't know how much pain you can take until you're tested. But pain isn't always bad, you know. When things are tough, just remember that it's life's way of preparing you for the future." Over time, Jesse learned to enjoy his speeches. It was fun to see the impact he could have on young people, and the public speaking skills he gained would help him throughout his life. When track season started in the spring, Jesse worked with Coach Larry Snyder. Snyder had been a star athlete in the 1920s. He might have made the 1924 Olympic team if he hadn't been injured. Snyder took up where Coach Riley had left off. He worked on Jesse's start, telling him to keep his feet closer together for a faster spring forward. On the track, Jesse was a brilliant student. He listened closely, took suggestions without complaint, and worked hard. Jesse realized that if he was going to compete against the best athletes in the world, every movement had to be perfect. Before, he only listened for the starting gun, but Snyder taught him to watch the starter's eyes. When he squeezed them shut, Jesse knew the starter was about to fire the gun, and he would be ready to explode out of the blocks that instant. Snyder was an expert at the broad jump. When they started training, Jesse said, "Mr. Snyder, in high school I made 24.5 feet on the broad jump more than once. People say it's pretty good, but I think I can do better. Do you think I could get over 25 feet someday?" Coach Snyder nodded slowly. 25 feet is just the beginning for you. Right now, your left leg is a little stronger than your right leg. You need to build up that right leg if you want to make a perfect jump. Get that leg strong, and you could jump 26 feet. Jesse could hardly believe it. Most people thought a 26-foot broad jump was impossible. But Jesse followed Coach Snyder's advice and quickly got past 25 feet. Then he progressed slow. One week he got half an inch farther. The next week he didn't improve at all. But over the course of a year, he moved closer to the magic mark of 26 feet. Chapter 10. Pain Means Nothing. In May of 1935, Jesse was getting ready for his first national collegiate track and field championships. He and Dave couldn't wait. "We get to compete against the best athletes in the country," Jesse said. "We've been training hard," Dave said. "We're ready." Jesse grinned. "You bet we are." They walked out of the house. Some of the fellows were playing a game on the lawn. "How about some touch football?" one asked. Jesse glanced at Dave. "What do you think? We don't want to risk getting hurt." Dave shrugged. "It's just touch football." "Yeah, you're right. Let's go." They ran to join the others. The casual game was a nice break from all the competition. Half an hour later, Jesse's side leaned together in the final huddle. "All right, the game is tied," Dave said. "What should we do?" One of the fellows nudged Jesse. "Let's give it to the sprinter here. Jesse can fake left and then go down the right sidelines. We'll all block for him." They lined up. The ball went to Jesse. He darted left, then spun and headed right. He raced ahead of the players who reached out for him. Moments later, he sprinted across the goal line. "Touchdown!" he yelled. His teammates cheered and ran over and jumped on him. Jesse staggered under their weight, laughing, until pain slashed through his back. "Get off, quick!" Jesse doubled over. Dave grabbed his shoulders. "Jesse, are you all right?" Jesse gasped. I'm not sure." He managed to straighten up. He took a few steps, but he could hardly walk from the pain. "You'd better tell Coach," Dave said. Jesse groaned but nodded. Dave helped him walk across to the campus. They found Larry Snyder and told him what had happened. Snyder shook his head. "Rest up for a few days. Only time will tell whether you can compete on Saturday." Jesse went home and collapsed on his bed. "It'll be all right," Dave said. Jesse put his hands over his face. "I can ignore the pain if I have to. I've done that before. But what if I can't go to the meet? This was my big chance." He shook his head. "I can't believe I did something so stupid." Dave patted his shoulder. "It's not over yet. You've got a week to get better. I'll get you a hot pad." The days passed, and Jesse's pain persisted. Sometimes it moved down his leg or into his foot. He tried soaking in hot water, heat pads, and rub-downs. By Saturday, he could walk upright, but his back hurt when he moved. "What do you think?" Dave asked. "Can you run?" "I don't know. It hurts pretty bad. I guess it'll be worse if I run," Jesse sighed. "But I'll go along anyway. I can't just sit at home." The team headed to Ann Arbor, Michigan. Jesse put on his tracksuit. Maybe, by some miracle, he would be able to compete. At least it was a warm day, so his muscles wouldn't stiffen. He jogged around the track, grimacing against the soreness. Coach Snyder stopped him. "Jesse, you're hurt. I'm not going to run you today." Jesse couldn't bear it. "Please, Coach, I have to run today. It's the national championships." Schneider shook his head. "I know that better than anyone, and I know what you could do for the team if you could run, but you can't. You could injure yourself so badly that you'll never race again. You know the Olympics are next year." Jesse had thought a lot about the Olympics, but on that day, only the national meet seemed important. "Listen," he said, "just let me try the 100. I can't hurt myself too much on such a short race. We can see how my back does." Coach Schneider hesitated. "I know I can do it," Jesse added. "All right," Schneider said, "but if it hurts, you ease up right then. Save it for other days." Jesse lined up for the 100-yard dash with top athletes from around the country. He crouched and shoved his spiked shoes into the ground. Pain shot through his back, but he concentrated on the race ahead. "Runners, take your marks," the starter said. "Get set." Jesse lifted his body, his weight on his fingertips. From the corner of his eye, he watched the starter point his gun towards the sky. As the starter pulled the trigger, Jesse shot from his crouch. Before the echo of the gun died away, the runners were pounding down the track. Jesse quickly took the lead. Each stride brought him farther ahead. He didn't even notice his back. It just felt good to be running again. The air rushed past him, and he felt like he was flying. He sailed across the finish line in first place. People crowded around him. Jesse laughed out loud. To think he had almost stayed home. He should have remembered, no matter what was wrong, running made him feel better. Coach Schneider grabbed him. "Jesse, you've tied the world record, 9 4/10 seconds. Two of the officials had actually timed him at 9.3 seconds, but the third had said 9.4, and only the highest number counted for a world record. Jesse stared at Coach Schneider, too shocked to speak. Finally, he grinned. "I guess I need a backache more often." Schneider laughed and pulled Jesse aside. "Do you want to try the broad jump too?" "You bet. I got a good feeling about this day." "I don't want you hurt worse, though," Schneider said, "and I don't want to wear you out before the other events. Make just one jump." Broad jumpers got 3 chances, and the best jump counted. If Jesse was going to jump just once, he would have to put everything into that jump. The world record for broad jump was 26 feet 2 inches. Jesse placed a handkerchief next to that mark. He'd never jumped that far before, but he wanted to come close. The handkerchief would show him how far he had to go. He waited at the end of the runway leading to the broad jump pit. The wind was at his back, but a strong wind could disqualify the jump. He waited until the breeze died down. He jogged forward and picked up speed until he was going at a flat-out run. He shortened his last stride to hit the board perfectly. His body rose into the air, and he kicked his legs. He flew closer to the towel. He flew over the handkerchief and landed past it. Jesse couldn't believe it. Could he really have matched the world record? Maybe he had put the handkerchief in the wrong place. Maybe the wind had moved it. He waited, hardly able to stand still, while the officials measured his jump. Then they measured it a second time. Finally, the track announcer held up Jesse's hand and said, "I wish to introduce a world champion." Jesse had broken the world record by more than half a foot with a jump of 26 feet, 8 1/4 inches. The crowd came to its feet and roared with excitement. People crowded around, full of questions. Only one question mattered to Jesse. Would he try for one more record? He would. After a 20-minute break, he lined up for the 220-yard dash. He wedged his spiked shoes against the ground. He waited for the starting gun to go off. When it did, he charged out of the start and took a quick lead. For the first part of the race, he was a stride ahead of the next 2 runners. But his energy was failing, and his back was aching again. Halfway through the race, the next runner pulled closer to him. Jesse reached inside and tried to find more energy. The other runner pulled closer. Jesse strained again and again. He wasn't just trying to beat the other runner. He was trying to beat himself. He found every last bit of strength, and he used it all. Finally, he started to pull forward. He was a yard ahead of the next runner when he broke the finish line tape. An official held up his stopwatch. 20 3/10 seconds. The second official looked at his watch. 20.3, he agreed. Jesse had broken the world record in the 220-yard dash by 0.3 of a second. The crowd roared again. Dave whooped and hugged Jesse. Ralph Metcalf shook his hand. "You did it, Jess. There are no more worlds left for you to conquer today." Jesse grinned. He had matched one world record and beaten 2 others. He felt on top of the world. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't over yet. His lungs were burning, but he jogged over to Larry Schneider. "Coach, I know this might sound crazy, but I'd like to run the low hurdles too." Snyder looked at him. "You've done amazing things today, Jesse, but even your body can only do so much. In the hurdles, you have to jump as well as sprint, and you won't have much of a rest. There's only a 2-mile run before the hurdles." Jesse spoke softly. "I'll never have another day like this in my life, Larry." It was the first time he had ever called his coach by his first name. Snyder smiled. "You're right. Get out there and have your day, but don't expect to tie any records. I'll be happy if you can win." "So will I," Jesse said, but part of him wondered. The hurdles were not his specialty, and he hadn't trained as hard for them, but on that day, he felt like he could do anything. Still, as he lined up next to the best college hurdlers in America, he began to doubt. Could he really beat them? What if he was too tired to even run well? A loss could hurt Ohio State and ruin his perfect day. He could still back out. He could blame his back injury. No one would think less of him. Charles Riley's words came back to him. "A time will come when you'll be asked for more than ability. Then you have to give it everything you have, more than you think you can. You have to make up the difference in manhood." The starter raised his gun in the air. Jesse rose onto his fingertips. Once again, he shot out in front. Once again, he gave it everything he had. Most hurdlers tried to skim the top of the hurdles, jumping just high enough to clear. Jesse's style was different. He flew high over the hurdles. That should have slowed him down, but his strong legs made up for it. He held his lead until his chest split the tape. The previous record was 23 seconds. The officials announced Jesse's time, 22.6 seconds. Jesse had set his 4th world record of the day. Dave and Ralph hugged Jesse and shouted his name. People cheered, no matter what team they had come to support. At the end of the meet, Charles Riley came down from the stands. The coach had come from Cleveland to see Jesse compete. He had tears in his eyes, and he said, "My boy, you've made me very proud." Chapter 11. Respect. Jesse became famous that day, but days like that were rare. Over the summer, Jesse lost several races to one of his rivals. Ulyss Peacock was another African-American originally from Alabama. Peacock was taller and more muscular than Jesse. In the spring of 1935, Jesse and Ulyss took turns winning the 60-yard dash and the broad jump. But that summer, Ulyss beat Jesse 5 times in a row. Some people said that Ulyss was the true champion and that Jesse's power was already fading. They met again at a race in Cleveland. The 60-yard dash was billed as a battle between America's 2 fastest men. Jesse greeted Ulyss and shook his hand. "I'm going to get you today. You wait and see." Ulyss smiled. "We'll see all right." They lined up at the start of the race. Jesse rose on his fingertips, all his energy ready to spring forward. He just had to win this race. He couldn't bear another loss. The starting gun went off and he shot down the track. To his surprise, he couldn't hear or see Ulyss next to him. He won the race easily. Jesse stopped and turned. Other runners crossed the line behind him, but not Ulyss. "What happened?" he asked an official. Peacock's starting blocks slipped. He dropped out of the race. Jesse jogged towards Ulyss, who walked to meet him. "Well, Jesse, I guess you won this one." Jesse shook his head. "I don't want to win this way. We'll race again." He dragged Ulyss to the officials and explained. "But the race is over," the official said. "People came to watch the 2 of us race," Jesse said. "We have to do it right." The officials and the other runners talked. Finally, they agreed. They would start the race over. The crowd cheered as they figured out what was going on. Once again, Jesse took his place at the start. The gun sounded. Jesse and Ulyss thundered down the track side by side. They broke the tape together. The judges ruled that Peacock had won by the smallest margin in 5.5 seconds. Again, the crowd cheered. Ulyss grinned and said, "Well, Jesse, are you satisfied now?" Jesse smiled back. "It's not our last race. I want to win, but I want to win because I did the best, not because someone else got unlucky." "Well said," Coach Snyder said. "Your success means you have a responsibility. People are watching you, not just on the track, but all the time. They'll be talking about you, so give them something good to talk about." The newspapers praised Jesse's sportsmanship. He didn't win the race, but he won respect. That felt pretty good, too. In the fall, Jesse went back to Ohio State and his job's there. For the first time in his life, he had money of his own. He sent most home to Ruth and his parents, but he still had enough to buy an old 1914 Ford with his friend Dave. They grinned at each other when they bought the car for $32.50. "Look at us," Dave said, "a couple of Alabama boys with our very own automobile." But the car wasn't just for fun. When the team traveled for meets, they drove. The white athletes went in a couple of newer cars. The black athletes went in Dave and Jesse's car. Jesse loved races, but everything else about traveling was hard. Even in the North, blacks couldn't eat in most restaurants. They had to stay at the YMCA while the white athletes went to a hotel. Black athletes could race against whites, but often couldn't use the locker room showers with them afterward. In the South, blacks weren't even allowed to compete against whites. On one Friday in February, they had a meet in Indianapolis. They started driving before dawn. Dave looked ahead at the cars full of white students and shook his head. "We're good enough to compete with them and win races for our team, but we're not good enough to ride with them." Jesse just shrugged. The white athletes were a nice bunch of fellows. They didn't even seem racist most of the time, but they didn't bother to make sure the black athletes got fair treatment. People just accepted it because it had always been that way. The sun came out, warming the air. Jesse's mood brightened as well. They passed through little farm towns that were just waking up. Like a giant flower, Jesse thought, maybe today Indiana will open up for us too. Coach Schneider pulled the first car up to a restaurant. The other cars pulled in behind. Jesse and his black teammates sat back. They watched the white athletes get out, stretch, and head into the restaurant. They could see Coach Schneider talking to the woman behind the counter inside. He leaned toward her. She shook her head. Coach Schneider walked slowly out of the restaurant. He looked towards Jesse's car and shook his head. One of the athletes rolled down the window and called out, "What did they say this time?" Snyder took a few steps forward. "She says the owner is out and she couldn't take the responsibility." The black athletes grumbled, but nobody was surprised. They hardly ever got to eat with the white fellows. They talked track and tried to ignore their stomachs. 10 minutes later, 2 of their white teammates came out. They had a stack of fresh bread and plates of fried eggs. They passed them through the window. "Now this is more like it," Dave said as they dug in. Jesse was just bringing the first bite of egg to his mouth when he heard a bellow outside his window. So this is why they wanted those extra orders. Jesse looked up at a big man with an apron hanging over his fat belly. They said it was for themselves, to eat on the road. "You were paid, weren't you, mister?" Dave asked. "I don't want money to feed you," he yelled. He reached in the car and grabbed the plates of food. Eggs and bread tumbled onto their clothes and the car seats and floor. Dave wouldn't let go of his plate. The man pounded at it with his fist. Food flew everywhere. Dave dropped the plate on the floor and leapt from the car. Jesse dashed after him and grabbed Dave just before he reached the man. Jesse held Dave's arms and whispered, "No, Dave, no." Dave strained against him, then slumped back and looked at Jesse. "All right. What's one more time?" The restaurant owner sneered and walked back to the restaurant. Dave swiped angry tears from his eyes as he got back in the car. "Now we can eat off the floor. That's how it's supposed to be, right?" Jesse hesitated. He understood how Dave felt. Sometimes he wanted to get out and fight as well. But a black man would go to jail for hitting a white man, no matter who started it. Besides, Jesse couldn't forget how he was raised. His father had taught him to always be polite. His mother had taught him to be true to himself, no matter what happened. Church had taught him to turn the other cheek. Charles Riley had taught him to control his anger and focus on the end of the race. Coach Schneider had warned him that the country was watching him. His actions brought shame or honor not only to himself, but to Ohio State and to all African Americans. Jesse swallowed. "Coach will stop someplace else and get us something." "That's not the point," Dave shouted. "Can't we ever fight back? Are we always going to have to call them mister?" "We are fighting," Jesse said softly. "We're fighting a bigger battle than this one little place, and we're winning too. We're winning when we study and get our degrees. We're winning when we come in first in a race. We're winning when we show them what we can do." Dave just grunted, but when they got to the track meet, all the black athletes raced their hearts out. They ran for themselves, and they ran to prove something to the world. Jesse won all his events. Even better, he felt the joy that running always gave him. Lots of people came up and asked for his autograph. One white man handed Jesse a Bible. "Would you put your name here, Mr. Owens?" Jesse stared at the man. Did he have a restaurant that wouldn't serve blacks, or a store that wouldn't sell to blacks? Did he work for a company that only let African Americans in the back door for deliveries? Did he live in a neighborhood that didn't sell houses to anyone with dark skin? Jesse smiled at the man, signed his Bible, and shook his hand. Maybe that man felt a little different than he had the day before. Maybe it was one more win in the big battle. After all, he had called Jesse Mr.